on Spectrum, Radio 1 FM 90.
Good evening, dear listeners. Welcome to Spectrum on Radio 1 FM 90. This Monday, the 27th of February, 2002. And our topic of discussion today, the quest for lasting peace in Somalia. The international community pledges support. Will these efforts yield, even with the internal contradictions among the Somali people? Now, after several years of turmoil, bloodshed and suffering, of course with famine, the international community has pledged to step up efforts to pacify Somalia. Last week, an international conference on Somalia was held in London under the auspices of the UK government, and several undertakings were made to deal with the situation in Somalia. Three challenges are evident in Somalia: insecurity, famine, and piracy. Now, these challenges have had a far-reaching implication on the security and trade at both regional and international level. The impacts of the situation in Somalia have been felt even in Uganda, Kenya, and Ethiopia in terms of terrorism and an influx of refugees. In his statement at this London conference, where all different actors within the Somalia governance system met, President Museveni highlighted 5 areas that require intervention if the situation in Somalia is to be addressed. He, however, warned that if external forces usurp the role of solving African problems unilaterally, failure and catastrophe are almost assured. Now, the UK Prime Minister, who convened this high-level meeting, David Cameron, indicated that there should be no further extensions for the transitional federal government of Somalia, and that the Somali people must determine the shape of their future and the institutions that will govern them. Currently, Somalia is governed by the transitional federal government, but now the international community is insisting that by August this year, an elected government must be in place. So as we speak now, currently Uganda, Kenya, Burundi, and Djibouti, plus forces from Ethiopia, are pursuing the Al-Shabaab, and already success has been registered in some areas. So tonight we are going to recap what happened in London to establish how soon we are likely to see peace returning to Somalia. And with me in the studio to help us understand the issues of Somalia better and what actually transpired in London, 2 gentlemen. Let me welcome Ambassador Acemah, retired diplomat, now a consultant in international affairs. Welcome to this show.
Thank you and good evening.
We are also happy to be joined by Mr. Kintu Nyago, the Deputy Principal Private Secretary to the President of Uganda, and he was also a member of the Ugandan delegation to the International Conference on Somalia, which was held on Thursday in London. Now, now let me start with you, Ambassador Acemah. Somalia has been under turmoil for a number of years, and of course, we read and hear about what is happening there. But many people do not understand how this country, which was once peaceful, degenerated into becoming lawlessness and a haven of terrorism. Can you begin by painting to us a picture? What exactly went wrong?
Thank you very much. Well, Somalia has not had a central government for over 20 years. In fact, since 1991, I believe, when General Siad Barre, who was a military dictator, was overthrown. And since that time, Somalia has been run or ruled by warlords, and eventually it just became a case of anarchy. There is no central authority in Somalia for the last 20 years. And of course, what was Somalia was partly an Italian colony. A big chunk of it was Italian colony. Mogadishu, for example, was the headquarters of the Italian colony of Somaliland. And then there was also the British colony, which is relatively peaceful, where they now, in fact, it's almost autonomous now. But since the overthrow of General Siad Barre in 1991, Somalia has literally fallen apart. But let me say this, that Somalia is perhaps a classic case. Of course, most political analysts call Somalia a failed state. But Somalia is a case of a country which is suffering as a result of tyranny, dictatorship. It is a classic case of a country which is suffering because of lack of democracy. So it's one of these cases which one hopes will not be repeated elsewhere in Africa. But we have had almost close to similar cases like in Liberia. You know, Liberia, Sierra Leone, at one time were pretty close to what we have in Somalia now. And yet, the irony of it is that Somalia is a homogeneous, relatively homogeneous society. You know, unlike Uganda, for example, most Somalis speak basically the same language, except for dialects. And secondly, most Somalis are Muslim, Islamic. I think over 95%. So, if one were to use the classic analysis of African politics, Somalia should be one of the most stable countries. Here is basically a homogeneous society, which has now been broken into clans. In fact, in Somalia, the conflict, the civil strife, the civil war, whatever you want to call it, is among clans. Clans fight each other, clans who speak the same language, who are all Muslim, and yet for 20 years they have failed to work together.
Now, Mr. Nyago, Ambassador here paints a picture that the Somalis simply are people from a common heritage. They come from the same household almost. They speak the same language. Majority of them profess the same religion. What exactly do you think went wrong?
It is slightly more than just because the ambassador seems to suggest that because of autocracy, because of dictatorship, that's why Somalia fell apart. It is slightly more than that. I think also the nature of colonialism. You might find it's most likely that the Italians, for instance, didn't leave any viable structures behind when they were in Somalia, and then what is much of Somalia now was colonized by the Italians. As he pointed out, Mogadishu was the base of the Italian colonial rule, because you find that let's take Ethiopia. Ethiopia has never been really democratic apart from possibly now under the current government, but in the past it was a feudal state, and then they had a military dictatorship, but it has never fallen apart because structures were in place. So that's very important to bear in mind. So dictatorship per se would not necessarily lead to falling apart. Now, some of the problems of Somalia also include which did mention, include statelessness. And that's a major challenge because Somalia is, there are not many places in the world where there are no states, but Somalia is one of them. And that statelessness is leading to regional instability. Apart from the institution I've mentioned, it's leading to regional instability. As piracy itself, that's a manifestation of regional instability. And also the problems that led Kenya to invade Somalia when, Kenya said that the Al-Shabaab people were kidnapping rebels and so forth. Or even what happened here, you remember, when they bombed in Kampala during, last year.
2010. You talk about the role of colonialists, and perhaps would this explain why the Italians are somehow very silent? If you compare what has been happening in other African countries, you find that the colonial master remains very key in addressing how that particular country is progressing. But if you look at the Somali situation, I do not see the Italians saying anything.
Yes and no, because the Italians actually, one can give them some credit, because I think they also colonized Libya badly, but I think the former leader, Gaddafi, conditioned them to give that country what they call reparations. Reparations are some kind of compensation for colonial rule. I think it's the only colonial power that has ever done that. Gaddafi made the Italians pay reparations in billions of dollars. Now, for Somalia, many things went under the bridge, because under Siad Barre, I think the ambassador may have mentioned him, Somalia was a base. You know, Somalia is on the sea. It has a very wide coastline, thousands of kilometers or miles, on the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean, leading to the Suez Canal and so forth, even the Gulf and so forth. So under the Siad Barre, Somalia had a major base for the Soviet Union. And so so the Soviet Union was a superpower. And then when Siad Barre, one of the problems that led to Somalia's current collapse was colonial rule, also based on the fact that the Somalis are found in five countries. They are found in Djibouti, they are found in Ethiopia, they are found in Kenya, they are found in Somalia itself, and I think some other country. Now, that under Siad Barre had a policy of trying to incorporate all those people.
The Greater Somalia.
Yes, into Somalia. And that led him to attack Ethiopia with Soviet support. But then the Soviet Union let him down. And the Chubans and then the Soviet Union decided to give support to the Ethiopians.
So his idea was to annex Somalia and form a united...
To annex part of Ethiopia that has Somalis called Ogaden. And when he did that, he had a very strong military with Soviet support. When he did that, the Soviet Union let him down and then decided to support Ethiopia. And the Americans instead began supporting him. But he couldn't win that war because the Soviet Union sent Chubans into Ethiopia.
So one would clearly say that partly one of the major problems that has caused what we are seeing in Somalia today could be the effects of the Cold War, because when you talk about
that was a major
Britain,
And I just add to what Kintu Nyago said.
Yes.
You see, if you want to go to the history of it, Somalia became independent in 1960, 2 years before Uganda. The first prime minister of Somalia was a man called Igal, I think Muhammad Igal. The president was Shamaki. They had a president and a prime minister. And they used to belong to, before the OAU was established, we used to have an organization called East and Central African Common Services, something. I think it was called Pan-African Movement for East Central Africa, PAFMECA.
Something like that, yes.
Somalia, Ethiopia, Uganda, we all belonged to that organization before OAU was established in 1963. Now, the point which Kintu made, you see, since the Somali flag, the original flag was light blue in color. It had 5 stars. The 5 stars were, of course, Somalia, Kenya, because the northern frontier district of Kenya is basically Somalis. And there are many prominent Somalis, even in the present Kenyan government. They used to have for many years after Kenya became independent, there was a group called Shifters. They're like Al-Shabaab. They fought a bitter war with the Kenyan government for years until they were defeated. The area called Ogaden, which Kintu mentioned, is actually basically ethnic Somalis. And then the Djibouti. And then, of course, within Somalia, the Italian Somaliland, and then the former British Somaliland. And so the history of it is that until Siad Barre's coup, Somalia was basically stable and peaceful. And very productive, by the way. Somalia used to export bananas. I think it's the only African country which used to export bananas in European American market. In fact, they used to have a trade name, I think it was an Italian company called Somalita. They used to even bring them here.
Of course, now if you look at what is happening in Somalia, they are surviving because of Russians. I went
to Mogadishu during those days. Very beautiful city, very white, very Italian. You know, like if you go to the capital of Eritrea, Acemah, another very typical Italian town, very, very beautiful Italian architecture. So I still want to stress the point I made. You see, Somalia is what is happening today is a result of the Siad Barre dictatorship. You see, when you close political space, because Siad Barre becomes so powerful that he was really running Somalia like it was his fiefdom. And when eventually he was overthrown, you see, all the things which are suppressed during his time, they just sort of, you know, it's like steam coming up.
I think
Mr. Nyago,
I think also had a problem of when he had problems, or he used to organize, because in Somalia clans are very strong. I mean,
very influential.
Not just influential, very, but also they are
like tribes.
Yeah, but they are very ingrained. And although Siad Barre at one time tried to, you know, to suppress them, but I think he also used them. And as a result, when he was losing power, that is the main institution that remained behind. The nation fell apart. So he didn't himself create a viable institution apart from the military, which collapsed. And then, and his own tribe was very much central in all this. So when his regime collapsed because of this Cold War, whatever issues that emerged, among these other factors, clanism came to center stage, and that is something fairly unique to Somalia.
Of course, you are, as already mentioned, you are a member of the Ugandan delegation at the meeting in London. Can you tell us what transpired there and whether there are tangible benefits that could lead to lasting peace in Somalia?
I think it's the right path. It is the right path. I mean, these things don't have simple solutions. 20 years since 1991, Somalia has not had a state. But the London conference, I think, is on the right path because it is building on efforts that are already underway. Look, many people have tried to solve the Somalia problem. The Americans intervened in Somalia. You may not have the father of President George Bush.
Bush, yeah.
Bush
they were flashed out, yeah.
I don't think they were flashed out, but they got fed up. I mean, they saw it as a problem that they couldn't possibly solve. Not that General Aidid and his men were much stronger than the American troops, but I think the cost-benefit, they decided that it was better to pull out because they thought it was something they could not fix. So now, I mean, they didn't spend a long time there. I think the UN was also there at one time. And then, so the African Union, by the way, on the president's statement, I think that's really, that's factual because the Americans went there more or less unilaterally. They didn't involve others. Well, they have the means, they have the capacity, but I mean, it takes more than that when you're intervening in some of these problems. So the current intervention that has been much more successful is of the African Union, what we call AMISOM. Is of the African Union, and it has been much more painstaking, but much more thoughtful, and I think it has bared more fruit. For sure, there's very many challenges. The Somali government, you yourself did. I mean, what has been agreed is that they should have a new government in place soon. The transitional arrangement must not be sustained for long.
That is by August this year.
August, yes. But I mean, that's a challenge. They need to find credible leaders. They need to find, be able to organize some form of elections. So things are still, there's still a major challenge. But at least you find that the AMISOM intervention, and I should add, in which Uganda and Burundi have played a very key role, has shown that Africans can participate positively in the solving of our problems. And this is not for the first time, because we find that also, for example, Idi Amin was being condemned by the entire world, and they were not doing much to solve that problem. And Mwalimu Nyerere, more or less on his own, decided to intervene for sure, with some support from Mozambique, some support from Zambia, decided to intervene and remove Idi Amin, the cancerous effect of Idi Amin from our society. Without Tanzania's intervention, Amin could have misruled us for I don't know how long, possibly another 10 years, I don't know. So, and then there have been many other interventions of Africans trying to solve African problems, and Nigeria, for example, in I think Liberia, ECOMOG, and so forth. And
so,
some success.
At this conference, was there a particular roadmap indicating what needs to be done between now and August? Because one would argue, like you already said, that this could be too little time if you take into account the challenges which are already manifesting themselves in Somalia. Is there a particular issue that they agreed upon to roll out?
There is a roadmap, but that roadmap does not say that Somalia will be settled in, say, this period. But there is a roadmap that spells out our attempts to ensure that things become better in Somalia. For example, what is required is the AMISOM troops. AMISOM needs more troops because Somalia is a very large country, so that AMISOM troops can move out of Mogadishu and pursue the Al-Shabaab outside Mogadishu. That has been agreed upon, because now we have 12,000 troops, and I think now it has been agreed that those troops should be increased to 17,000, I think 500 or 17,700 something.
17,733. 31.
Yes.
17,731.
Yes. So those troops, with the support, the troops, I'm sure, again, would come from African countries. Uganda is willing to contribute more. Others have also promised, and I'm sure Burundi. But also, more fundamentally, the West, Britain, America, and others. America was also there. Secretary of State Clinton, Madame Clinton was also there, and amongst other people. I've agreed to fund this intervention with the right funding, with support of logistics and so forth, and humanitarian assistance, because there is need for as you mentioned yourself, there is famine and so forth. So it has been agreed to also provide humanitarian assistance to Somalia and so forth.
Just to add to what
Ambassador, before you add on what Mr. Nyago has just informed us, we'll go for a short commercial break, and when we return, Ambassador will tell us whether he sees any hope in what came out from the London meeting.
Just like an uncut diamond is brought to life by unmatched skill and dedication, only our brewmaster holds the secret to crafting a crystal malt lager. Under the exacting international standards at Now Breweries, he uses only the finest, most carefully selected grains of roasted crystal malt and sets in motion the delicate process of releasing their full roast. The result is a world-class beer with a fresher aroma, a richer golden color, and a maltier taste.
Nile Gold Crystal Malt Lager. Beyond an ordinary malt.
Not for sale to persons under 18.
Special fares to the US, London, China, and India, with extra baggage allowance on selected flights. To book your flight, contact your local travel agent or call us on 041-7800-900 or book online at QatarAirways.com/UG. Qatar Airways, world's 5-star airline. Terms and conditions apply.
Alive and free. I wanna be 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 alive and free. You and me.
Uganda Waraji, the spirit that binds us.
Strictly not for sale to persons under 18 years. Please drink responsibly.
Spectrum on Radio 1 FM 90 is brought to you by Stanbic Bank.
Welcome back from that commercial break. Our topic of discussion on Spectrum today, the quest for lasting peace in Somalia, the international community pledges support. Will these efforts yield even with the internal contradictions among the Somali people? And I'm your host, Kenneth Lukwago, and in the studio, privileged to have Ambassador Harold Acemah, a retired diplomat, now a consultant in international affairs. We are also privileged to have Mr. Kintu Nyago, Deputy Principal Private Secretary to the President, and he was also a member of the Ugandan delegation to the International London Conference on Somalia. Before we went for an ad break, Mr. Nyago had told us a number of issues that came up at that particular conference. But before you give me and our listeners your views on what transpired there, criticism has already started coming up about what transpired in London. For instance, Oxfam International, one of the leading organizations that are operating in Somalia, issued a statement, and if I may quote, they say, "We anticipated the conference would offer hope to the millions of people hit by drought and conflict, and support to build a peace process that included a wide section of Somali society. What we got was the rhetoric of Somali inclusion, but you cannot go forward with a new constitution and elections in such a troubled country without a wide and inclusive political engagement within the Somali society." From this statement, one would argue that what Oxfam is actually saying, that the solutions that Mr. Nyago was talking about, including the military intervention, are not reliable. Oxfam thinks to believe that actually there is a political issue to be addressed here.
You see, Kenneth, there's no magic wand which one could wave to solve a problem which has existed for over 20 years. There's been anarchy in Somalia. There's been no central authority. But what I wanted to add to what Mr. Nyago said was basically two things. One, of course, the troop level has been increased by the Security Council from 12,000 to almost 18,000. And secondly, the cost of the military operation is going to also increase. Currently, it's about $250 million per annum. It's going to go up to about $550 million. And most of the costs are going to be paid by the European Union, the United States, of course, the United Nations. And the AMISOM and AU must certainly be commended for a job well done. I think this is one of the success stories, and hopefully it will even get more successful in due course. But one of the reasons why maybe it has been successful was they has tried to address two issues. One, the military problem, which basically involves putting an end to the Al-Shabaab menace in Somalia. But more fundamentally, the root cause of this tragedy in Somalia is political. You see, the lasting solution will come about when political solutions agreed by the Somali people are put in place.
What are some of those political solutions that they should be looking at the moment?
Well, you could put them under the rubric of democracy, democratic rule. You see, the state has broken down in Somalia. There's been no state. A conspicuous absence of a central authority, except in the Somaliland, the former Somaliland, and Puntland, those two areas. In fact, in my opinion, maybe one of the solutions could be, you see, Somaliland has been trying to break away. When I was still in the service, they sent a delegation, remember, in the late 1990s. They came to Uganda seeking Uganda support for recognition, because Somaliland was a British colony like Uganda. And certainly we had sympathy with them, but government of Uganda decided not to give the recognition. They went to a number of other countries, including Kenya and others.
And they have also been to the African Union meetings several times.
But you see, it's a country which has its own currency. It has got some stability. It operates basically like a state, but nobody
with
has no recognition. Maybe one possibility would be to recognize Somaliland as a sovereign state, because it would be bigger than many members of the African Union.
How does this deal with the problem which is in Somalia? Because these are two different...
Because you have had 20 years of anarchy, 20 years of civil war. Now, arising from that, the problem is piracy. You see, piracy basically is a result of a lack of central authority. You know, it is a no man's land. Okay.
Are you suggesting that Somaliland, which broke away like you already painted, could be playing a role in the insurgency?
No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is this. You see, the Somali Republic, which was born in 1960, consisted of a former Italian colony. This is the bigger part of Somalia, and also a former British colony called Somaliland. I think the capital is Hargeisa. They have been relatively stable. You see, you have this. You see, the chaos in Somalia is basically in the former Italian colony. It's a large country. It's about 3 times the size of Uganda, I think. The land, yes. You see, the land areas is quite big. Of course, most of it is desert. And one good news, you know, there's always some silver lining at the end of it, on a dark cloud. Apparently, they have discovered, I think there's oil. They have found some oil in Somalia. You know, maybe when oil starts to flow, there'll be more interest in what's happening in Somalia. But if Somalia was split into 2 or 3 countries, they would still be able to. They would not be the smallest member of the African Union. You know. Now the other idea which has also been proposed is to have the UN take over managing Somalia as a trust territory.
But from what we are seeing from the London conference, they are actually saying that the Somali people should be able to govern themselves, should be able to put in place an effective government by August this year. Is this viable? Is it possible?
It is viable. I mean, it's not easy, but it's viable, because it's not as if there's nothing in place. Also, regarding the Oxfam critique, the London conference mentioned what you have just mentioned, but also it mentioned that there should be a constituent assembly. And in that constituent assembly, it mentioned that 30% of the members of that constituent assembly should be women, to play as a minimum, whatever, to play a key role, to chart out a constitution.
Of course, whatever they agreed upon in London could be viable, like you're saying. But the big question is, where are those institutions going to be based? Currently, even the TFG government is non-existent in Mogadishu. They are always in Nairobi. They are always in Kampala. Where will these institutions be based?
You are talking about the past, because when Amisom, as you may know, liberated Mogadishu. Before that, the TFG government was at one time, even the parliament, was at one time based in Nairobi. But now, the TFG government is in Mogadishu, because Mogadishu is by the way, now very vibrant. People are even going there for business. I mean, the Turkish and others, people, you mentioned about oil. Many people are going in because of the Amisom's achievements of kicking out Al-Shabaab. And our boys here, the EPDF and the Burundi, they have played a very key role in that. So now Mogadishu is very settled. Is really peaceful. But the challenge is to have governance structures within Mogadishu, so like city, as the ambassador mentioned. So after having statelessness, because cities must have structures. For example, in Kampala, you have got LCs, you have got municipal councils, and so forth. So those are the challenges, and this is being given very serious thought, to have structures in place, governance structures in place in Mogadishu, governance structures in place in the liberated territories to ensure that, and Uganda is sharing its experience in that. We have some experience in governing liberated territories. So Ugandan experts are engaged in that to ensure that we could borrow lessons or lend lessons to our brothers and sisters in Somalia about this, and this is being given very serious thought by the Somalis. Now, one of the other problems of Somalia is that the Al-Shabaab has been influenced by foreign ideology, exclusive foreign ideology that thinks that it's only them, the Al-Shabaab, that must have a say in Somalia. Now, that is important to bear in mind, that is the ideology of Al-Shabaab. Al-Shabaab thinks that it's only them, nobody else. It is only them that have a say in Somali issues. Now, that is not healthy anywhere. I mean, you might be in a political party or whatever, but you cannot see that only your party has a say. Especially with Al-Shabaab being extremists. They are saying that women must not do this, people must not, I mean, and that is a foreign ideology, I think, coming somewhere from Afghanistan or so, I don't know where, where these kind of characters have been based. What is it called? Tora Bora Mountains. Somewhere there, I think. That kind of, so this kind of ideology cannot be allowed to be imposed. To be imposed, because Al-Shabaab doesn't want to go for elections. Should not be the AMISOM, the AU, IGAD are very keen to ensure that this kind of that kind of exclusivist ideology is not imposed upon the people of Somalia, and then by extension the region. Apart from that, you find that I'm certain, and it's true, useful lessons are being learned from the areas that the ambassadors mentioned, Puntland and Somaliland. Useful lessons are being drawn from there, with the hope of these being also being learned by the area that used to be former where Mogadishu is located. Now, is the solution to recognize Puntland and Somaliland? Possibly it's much more complex, because as we mentioned earlier on, one of the problems of Somalia was the fact that the Somalis were placed in 5 different countries, and that led to a very radical nationalism in Somalia that aimed to incorporate their brothers and sisters into Somalia. So the creation of more statelets may create more problems than solutions. I think the better solution is having one Somalia that comes together democratically, and also regional integration. Because if we have regional integration, then that challenge of people wanting to think that they must get their Somali brothers and sisters into one Somalia is minimized, because we shall have one regional integration, regional area where everybody feels free to interact without. The consequence of Bismarck's conference in Berlin that led people, because that is one of the problems of Somalia, of having people divided into different countries and leading into a very rapid nationalism that led into the Shifta War on the one hand and also the Ogaden War on the other.
Dear listeners, soon you'll be able to call in and contribute or ask questions about the discussion that we are having now. But before we do allow our listeners to come in, one of the solutions that the President Museveni has prescribed is to help the Somali people to expel the Al-Shabaab away from Somalia. But of course there are people who are saying that the fighting in Somalia is not only about the terrorism aspect, it's also an issue of the ideology, like Kintu Nyago said. These are people who believe that Somalia should be governed under an Islamic Sharia law setup. Do you think the proposal by the President to help the Somali people to expel away the Al-Shabaab is a recipe for lasting peace, if you look at what is happening?
Is it personal? I believe that lasting peace in Somalia will come about through political means. This is the military operation is really aimed at finding a short-term solution to stabilize the situation before political means can be used to find a lasting solution. But the idea of expelling Al-Shabaab, of course, part of this is what AMISOM is doing. And also the Security Council, in addition to increasing the number of soldiers who are going to be deployed in Somalia, has widened the mandate of AMISOM. So AMISOM has got a broader mandate now, and it's not restrictive. So hopefully, with this increased number of troops and with the expanded mandate, AMISOM should be able to I think, put an end to this Al-Shabaab menace. But the Al-Shabaab are Somalis. Where do you expel them? Where do they go? You see, really, what needs to be done to pacify Somalia? And I think the prospects are now good. Now, you see, Somali politics revolves around Mogadishu. Now that Mogadishu is wholly under the control of AMISOM, I think gradually they will find a way to neutralize the Al-Shabaab in the outlying areas. But obviously it will take time. I think our friends in Oxfam should not imagine that after the London conference this week everything will be so Somalia would all of a sudden be a different place. It will take time. And I think we need a lot of patience, and we must not give up. That's the important thing.
Okay, at this moment, let's bring in our listeners. Listeners, you can join this discussion by calling 0414-348-111, 0312-260-390, 0312-261-390. Kindly keep your comment short and ask a question, but also remember to stay away from your radio set when you're calling in to avoid feedback. And as we are still waiting for the listeners, okay, I think we have a caller online. I think we've lost that caller.
Just briefly, Mr. Kwak.
Yes, Mr. Nyago.
The issue is not Sharia law. We should not, AMISOM or the Uganda government, they are not opposed to Sharia law. What they are opposed to is political intolerance. Because as I've mentioned, Al-Shabaab has an ideology that thinks that they are the sole voice of the Somali whatever. That is, nobody can accept that, especially when they are as extremists, as they are with that foreign ideology from to the border mountains. So the issue is not Sharia law. Sharia law is welcome. There are many Africans who are practicing Sharia law. Go to Mombasa, for example. There are Kadi courts, or even in Uganda, Sharia law is accepted amongst our Muslim brothers and sisters.
But you'd also agree that there is a misunderstanding. Some people misinterpret Sharia law to be radicalism.
I'm not in that category. That's why I'm saying that Sharia law
that
is Uganda. Even in Uganda, Sharia law is being practiced by our Muslim brothers here within their domestic whatever and religious issues, interpretation of their social whatever life, or in the new Kenyan constitution, except for what they call Kadi courts.
Okay, we have a listener online. Hello. Welcome to Spectrum.
Thank you.
Yes.
I am AM calling from Mutinda.
Yes, AM.
I want to salute those guests. First and foremost, I want to salute the government of Uganda and government of Burundi who sent the troops to help our brothers in Somalia. It has been long overdue, especially the European Union, the US, because that case started from 1990. As a result of the dictator. So they have realized it. I think with all that support of the international community, our brothers, the Somalia, will have sanity. And the issue of Sharia is a good thing, but it should not apply on such a where the people are disgruntled and you say you just apply Sharia. I think that one we should just condemn. We just democracy in Somalia, people get into votes and they elect their leaders. But the issue of Sharia is not introduced on the wall. No, it comes with a well-organized research, and it should be entertained by everybody, but not just because you are being oppressed, you have your own interest, then you apply Sharia. Thank you.
Do we have another caller on the line? Now, of course, the listener brings in the element of imposing.
Yes.
There are people also believe that actually one of the big questions that must be asked about the London conference is whether the solutions that were prescribed are not being imposed on the Somali people.
No, and again, it's important to bear in mind that the AMISOM, the thinking behind AMISOM, the thinking behind the IGAD countries, the thinking behind the African Union, and by extension the international community, because Africa is playing a very central role in this. We are not saying that a military solution is the military whatever intervention and solution is the solution to Somalia. No. A very large premium, the main emphasis is political. But I mean, as even the ambassador mentioned, you just don't wake up one day and, in the Bible, God in 7 days created the world.
But do you envisage a political solution in Somalia without the involvement of the Al-Shabaab?
That's a different matter. But I'm going to respond. I'll respond to it. The important point is that solutions. We don't have the capacity of, like in the creation story of the Bible, within 7 days God made the world. That things don't work that way. But that said, for Al-Shabaab to be part of the solution, they must accept to negotiate. You see? If they don't, and because Al-Shabaab that has refused to negotiate.
And they must have non-violence.
Yes. They have refused to negotiate, and they are saying that they have all the solutions. And that their solution is that they are the only right people. Now, if they are the only right people, they have been told, go for polls, go for elections, they have refused. So so long as they have that kind of ideology which they got from the Tora Bora Mountains, they will be fought until they change their ideology, accept to negotiate and accept to be Democrats.
Ambassador Acemah, maybe the Al-Shabaab want to introduce the element of the movement system that we had here. Under the movement system for some time we were really under the same bracket. Could they be borrowing from a new party system from what happened in Uganda?
I don't know. You see, the Al-Shabaab, now they have teamed up Al-Qaeda. You see, the agenda is really very negative.
Exactly.
And they're using Sharia as a cover. You see, Sharia basically means Islamic law, Quranic law. Is what is prescribed in the Holy Quran. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, in northern Nigeria, they've been using Sharia laws even from British colonial days. It's always existed side by side with common law.
But Ambassador,
yes,
you remember there was a time when the Islamic courts were in charge of Somalia.
Yeah.
There was relative peace. And in fact, one of the biggest issues that international spectators talk about was the failure by the international community to engage the Islamic courts, who were also governing under the Sharia law.
Yes, I'm glad you used the word relative. You see, the Islamic courts, I think the given time they would have ended up like Al-Qaeda. You see, I think their agenda was to first lull people into believing that they mean well. You remember the Taliban in Afghanistan? They banned girls from going to school. They came up with some of the most outrageous things you could ever expect any government to do in the 20th century, live on in the 21st century. So really, what Somalia? You see, Somalia was a flourishing, democratic, multi-party system. For 10 or more years after independence. In fact, from 1960 up to when Ziad Barre staged his coup.
69.
Yes, 69 years. About for a decade, Somalia was like we are in Uganda today, and the economy was booming. Tourism was a big industry. So Somalia can go back to that type of system. Secondly, Somalis are very enterprising people. You see them here. You go to City Tire, go to Nakumatt,
Nairobi.
Go to Nairobi. In Canada, some of the most enterprising Africans are Somalis. So the potential is there. And really what the challenge for us friends of Somalia is to find ways and means to bring all the Somalis together. Say, you fought for 20 years, nobody has won. You see, even if you fight for another 20 years, you will end up with nothing useful. So really, let's explore other options, other peaceful options. Invariably, it will take time, but I think the number one step forward would be to put an end to the conflict. Yes, the military conflict. And I think the rest can be resolved because Somalia have got advantage in the sense that it's a relatively homogeneous society. I think these clan differences, of course, they have been exaggerated because of the conflict, of the fighting. But I think, and also Somalis in the diaspora, they should play a more constructive role. I think in fact, a lot of the resources which are used for the conflict in Somalia come from outside. All the rich Somalis, you see, they should really.
You're actually saying there are people of Somali origin in the diaspora who are funding
Of course, they're the ones funding most this war. When I was in Canada, I know that many of them they were very prosperous. They used to buy lorries. They used to send money to buy guns. And really, you see, it needs the effort of Somalis both in the diaspora and within Somalia itself to say, let's put an end to this conflict. It is fratricidal. It is not helpful at all.
Now, Mr. Nyago, of course, Ambassador here talks about the Somali in the diaspora. Was their voice heard at the London conference, and what role are they going to play?
Their voice was definitely heard, but to start with, the legitimate Somali government was represented. The Prime Minister was there, and also the President was there. And there have been consultations going on. I mean, this London conference was not a one-off. There has been a lot of consultations, some of which took place in Puntland, I think, or Somaliland, a place called Garo. So there are a lot of the input of the Somali intellectuals and so forth has been engaged.
So would we say by August this year we are likely to see more progress towards a solution?
I think so. I think the London conference is not a one-off solution, but the London conference points in the right direction. As the ambassador has pointed out, funding is going to double to support the AMISOM effort. Also, humanitarian assistance has been, in principle, there has been acceptance of humanitarian assistance to go into Somalia. So such interventions, the democratic process is also being incorporated because there is a realization that the solution is not military. AMISOM is doing a very good job, but the solution is not military. The solution is political. And this political solution has to involve constitution making, has to involve including everybody, all inclusive, that Oxfam talked about. That's why women are part of the solution. 30% of the structures that are going to make the constitution are going to be women, Somali women. So I think the future is bright, but not easy, but bright, yes.
Okay. At that point, Spectrum has to come to an end today. I must thank you, Ambassador Harold Acemah, retired diplomat, now consultant in international affairs. Thank you very much for coming to Spectrum. I must also thank you, Mr. Kintu Nyago, Deputy Principal Private Secretary to the President, who you are also a member of the Ugandan delegation to the International London Conference. Thank you very much for coming to Spectrum.
Thank you.
Listeners, Spectrum will be back tomorrow, same time, here on Radio 1 FM 90. And I'm your host, Kenneth Lukwago, signing off. Have a good evening.
Promotion. Kutoka MTN. We send million shillings.